Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Ramona Gönzel, and I'm an associate professor in Romanian language here at SSEES. And I'm also the academic coordinator for SSEES online language evening classes and the co-director and convener of the PROLang research group. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you, Professor Gusejnov, for your presence. Special thanks also go to Professor Maria Rubins, who will chair the event, and Rachel Morley, Associate Professor in Russian Cinema. I just want to say a few words about PROLang, which is a new interdisciplinary initiative set up at SSEES UCL by myself, together with a few more colleagues, many present here tonight. PROLang stands for Policy, Research and Outreach in the field of language-based area studies, with particular focus on languages of the Central, Eastern and Southeastern Europe and the Baltic region that we cover through our degrees and evening courses. We offer a total of 18 languages from the region. PROLang aims are to provide a forum for colleagues from the UK and partner universities and beyond to collaborate on interdisciplinary research topics with languages at the core, to interact with policymakers, practitioners, and the public in order to aid and inform wider debates in language-based area studies and cultural, economic, political, and sociological research, to ensure that languages remain in focus in the post-Brexit landscape, to pay special attention to decolonizing the curriculum for language-based area studies courses by creating balanced multiple centers of interest, to increase the esteem of SSEES as a global leader in language-based area studies. We will also post a link to our online evening class program in the chat. Beginner classes start in October, other levels can join at the start of term 2 and term 3. This is a crucial time for the whole world to reconnect and collaborate long-term through educational endeavors that impact our world, and this is what we're doing here tonight. Just a kind request for the audience online to post your questions in the Q&A function and not in the chat function. We're also recording this event. I will now give the microphone to Professor Maria Rubins, Professor of Russian and Comparative Literature, who will chair the event and introduce our speaker tonight.
Thank you, Ramona. Dear colleagues, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Gasan Gusejnov, whom I've seen over the years in many different places on many different continents, but it's the first opportunity for me to welcome him here at UCL. As an academic, Gasan combines quite distant and diverse specialties, from ancient Greek drama and classical philology to the development and evolution of contemporary Russian. Most of his recent publications bring into dialogue cultural history, sociolinguistics, political and ideological discourses. His book, Нулевые на кончике языка, presents a fascinating analysis of the linguistic changes that occurred in post-Soviet Russia and relates these changes to more general tendencies in the Russian society and its collective mentality. I also would like to point out that Professor Gusejnov is one of the co-founders of Open Russian University, which is registered in Latvia, but basically for the time being exists in virtual space. Through online courses, this university offers much needed alternative forms of education to the global Russian community across the globe, across the world. It's a very important initiative, particularly in the current climate of massive immigration out of Russia, and especially of younger people. And in addition to academic and administrative excellence, Gasan is a man of many talents, and I particularly appreciate his talent for telling jokes, Russian anekdoты, although I'm not sure whether you will be able to sample some of it today, as he may choose to remain serious on this occasion. The title of his lecture today is From Jokes to War of Extermination, Post-Soviet Russian Ukrainianism in the Linguistic and Ideological Dimension, 1991-2022. Gasan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation, and thank you, Ramona, for very good contextualization of today's seminar, and thank you, Masha, for your words. I must tell you at once that I have a very mixed feeling now. On the one side, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to see faces of old friends and colleagues, and also faces of young people whom I never saw before. It is a great pleasure also after 2.5 years of COVID and so on. But on the other side, I have a very bad feeling, a very deep bad feeling, and it is really painful. It's not just a word, that the subject of our meeting today is this terrible war of extermination, this terrible war of maybe centuries ago, in the style, in the sense, in the idea, a war which is destroying human lives all over Ukraine, and not only in Ukraine, but also in the countries where refugees are going and where they have terrible psychic problems, where they lose their normal life, their normal understanding of what's going on. So this context makes any talk on the subject very problematic, especially now when we are sitting here in a beautiful university building, Masaryk room. We immediately think about history, not only about Masaryk, but also about Russia, about Russian Empire, the decline of Russian Empire and Austria-Hungary. At the same time, we are in the center of studies of Eastern European countries. But it has something to do with the subject of this seminar. I hope that after you heard my paper, there will be questions and comments and discussion. Because this war, which started in the year 2014 and was continued on the 24th February 2022, it was just a continuation of this war. This event was not expected by so many scholars. And that is, of course, a sort of bankruptcy of us scholars of the Eastern Europe, because although everyone, nearly everyone, myself too, we can show our articles of the year 1991, 2002, 2004, 2014, where we predicted this war, exactly. But why nobody listened to us? It's also our fault. And I'm not going to cite my own publications of these decades. I would like to answer one question. And in order to understand this question, I would like you to see 9 seconds of the presentation or interview of a very prominent Russian propaganda activist, Margarita Simonyan, who said the following.
Понимали, что в горячей войне мы Украину победим за 2 дня. Чего ее побеждать-то, господи, ну Украина, ну, подавили эти огневые точки, вот мы в рекламную паузу это обсуждали, да?
Hot war.
Понимали, что...
We will win in Ukraine in 2 days. What is it to win the Ukraine? Look, and then she's smiling. She's pronouncing the word Ukraine and she's smiling. And my question is, why is she smiling? It's not just her personal attitude. She's smiling because she is expecting that people who are talking about Ukraine, who are listening about Ukraine, listening to her, they will smile too. And that is my main question. And I will immediately tell you my thesis, so to say, the idea I came after studying this subject, or after having studied this subject since the end of the 1970s. And the idea is that we, as witnesses of this war, probably didn't see the main attitude towards Ukraine in the Soviet Union, in the Russian Empire, and in the post-Soviet Russia. And this attitude is expressed in the language, which may be called anti-Ukrainian language, anti-Ukrainian discourse inside the Russian language and the Russian culture. I will start with one citation by a very interesting and talented American author of Ukrainian origin, Askolt Melnichuk. He published a couple of months ago an article in Literary Hub under the title, "The Russian War on Ukraine has always been a war on its language." And Askolt Melnichuk is citing, so I'm citing Askolt Melnichuk. Askolt Melnichuk is citing Vladimir Nabokov, his brilliant essay on Gogol. We must thank fate and the author's thirst for universal fame for his not having turned to the Ukrainian dialect as a medium of expression, because then all would have been lost, wrote Vladimir Nabokov in his 1944 study Gogol. He continued, "When I want a good nightmare, I imagine Gogol penning in Little Russian dialect volume after volume, what he calls the Little Russian dialect." And now these words are the words of Askolt Melnichuk, not of Vladimir Nabokov. Is none other than the Ukrainian language, which is about as close to Russian as Spanish is to Italian. Nabokov's dismissal of the Ukrainian language reflects a position taken by countless Russian writers and intellectuals over the last century. Such attitudes have consequences. It is not much of an exaggeration to say that this prejudice has contributed to the slaughter of millions of people and is a significant factor in the war currently being waged by Russia against Ukraine. Putin has expressly stated that he has attacked Ukraine in order to protect the large Russian-speaking population of the easternmost region of the country known as the Donbass. End of quote by Askolt Melnichuk. The focus of my paper is not generally linguistic, let us say, means which helped to start this attack, this war. My focus is, and I argue that one of the most important tools for preparing the destruction of Ukraine was making Ukraine ridiculous. Are there linguistic means that have so paralyzed Russian society which couldn't say a word against this war? That is the question. I am not questioning why these war criminals like Putin and his gang started the war. It is a subject of completely different investigation, which has also a linguistic dimension. My question is, how could it happen that a relatively big country of probably 130 million people, I don't believe the official Russian figures, 144 millions. And I'm sure that one of the reasons this war started was to catch the Ukrainian population, which is healthier, which is richer, which is better educated than the Russian. But I'm not talking about those who started the war. I am talking about these 130 or 140 millions of Russians. Why didn't they realize immediately that what we are witnessing now is an attempt, a sort of reconquista of ČK, KGB, NKVD, MGB, FSB. Why? How could it happen? And for my opinion, and that's my main thesis, is that we have to look for the explanation, not in sociology or politology, because we see that the whole society, from the very top to the very bottom, is acting simultaneously and similarly. That is why it is not a politological, it is not a sociological, it is an anthropological perspective. We have to deal with a specific situation, and I found the theoretical basis for my speech today in an anthropological concept known as the joking relationship. This joking relationship, so simplifying and deriving this concept from anthropology of Asia and Africa, we can call the joking relationship the ritualized right of a nephew to ridicule or ridiculize and even rob his maternal uncle and staying impune. This impunity for robbing, trolling, and ridiculing, making joke about brother of your mother. And since the former Russian Empire, and especially in the USSR, used a very strong ideology and mythology, brotherhood, we are family of 3 nations with one elderly brother, but still we are all brothers and sisters. This joking relationship is a principle which can explain the ideology of this sort. And this joking relationship was a part of Soviet culture. The semantic emphasis in the concept is on the word joke or anecdote in Russian. But before touching upon the so-called ethnic anecdotes, I am actually not going to say anything about these jokes because it will not be the subject in general. Maybe in the discussion we can say a couple of words about it. But Ukrainian culture as a whole in Russia since the beginning of 19th century at least fell into the discourse of the ridiculous, despite simultaneously the most serious and ferocious colonial persecution of Ukraine, forbidding of Ukrainian language, forbidding of Ukrainian societies and so on. And now I'm going to Nikolai Vasilievich Gogol, who entered Russian literature through the Ukrainian gates. And this path of his, from the Little Russians to the Russians, from Malorossy, Velikorossam, Ikruskim, was most vividly described in the essay Nikolai Gogol by Vladimir Nabokov in the year 1944. It is interesting that this essay was written during the war, the Second World War, but was translated into Russian, as we said it in Russian, с опозданием на советскую власть, 40 years after it was published. So it was published after it was published in English. So the Russian public could read what one of the greatest Russian authors of the 20th century wrote about one of the greatest Russian authors of the 19th century, only in the year 1986, 1987, when literature stopped to interest anybody in Russia. Before that, it was in the center of attention of the society, but not after that. So Nabokov said that almost all of Gogol's early work is opera, romance, and old-fashioned farce. All Ukrainian was for Nabokov in Gogol, something like vaudeville. It so happened that Gogol himself saw his Ukrainianness in a double mirror. As an imperialist and Pushkinist, he was a lover of Pushkin, and he saw himself as pupil of Pushkin. Gogol considered Russia and Great Russia, Velika Russia, as something which should imply Malorussia or Ukraine. So Russian language should swallow Ukrainian language. Ukrainian language is actually not a language for him. It is a dialect. And this understanding was extremely strong. And we can say now there is a very popular Russian word, resources. So Ukrainian as resource was given by Gogol to Russian literature. And thus, within the 19th century, many writers who were writing about Gogol and about the first steps of greatest Russian prosa, they said, look, what about Malorussia? Gogol has given everything to Russian literature. And since that time, since the beginning of the 19th century, or the first half of the 19th century, Gogol died 1852, the idea that Russian, is more than Velika Russia, as Great Russia, in comparison to Malorussia, Small Russia, or Little Russia, and Belarus. Russia is more than Velika Russia. Russia is more than Great Russia. Why? Because Russia has swallowed Ukrainian. Ukrainian is a part of Russia. If we could see this, yes, could we please?
We can't increase it because we're sharing screen so it has to be
I understand.
emphasized.
So I'm sorry, but I will read this text because it is one of the most important texts written by Gogol, and it is his letter to his mother. And this letter is cited by Nabokov in his book on Gogol. And this letter explains us why Russians in general started looking at Ukrainian as something funny, ridiculous, not serious. So Nabokov quotes Gogol's letter to his mother, written on July 24th, 1829. I tender my most heartfelt and inexpressible thanks for the precious information you gave me about Little Russia, and beg you not to stop sending me communications of that kind. In the quiet of solitude, I am storing up things which I shall not publish before all the details are worked out, as I hate to hurry and to do things in a superficial manner. I also want to beg you, dear mother, when you write out personal names and various Ukrainian appellations, to do so as legibly as possible. If my work ever comes out in print, it will be in a foreign language. The dream of Gogol to be published in the West, so that basic exactitude is especially important, as otherwise some essential national term might get badly distorted. Excuse me for troubling you even now with such requests, but I take this liberty knowing what pleasure it gives you to need them. In my turn, I shall describe to you the customs and occupations of the good Germans, because he was going to Germany, to Lübeck. The atmosphere of novelty, the strangeness and charm of things seen for the first time, and all matters that may make a strong impression upon me. My gratitude is also due to Father Sava. Tell him I beg him to add his notes to your communications. That was Vladimir Nabokov's translation of Gogol's letter to his mother. So we realize, and we understand after we have read that, why Russian critics in the years 1831, 1832, as the first Ukrainian works by Gogol were published, said, look at this Rudy Panko, this guy under pseudonym who published these works. he pretends to be Ukrainian, but he is fake Little Russian. He is, and there is a Ukrainian anti-Russian word Moskal, which means Muscovite, but in a sense that somebody who is ruling us, the bad Russian, so to say. So he is Moskal. Gogol is переодетый Moskal. Nabokov contrasts three Gogols. The first Gogol of this Little Russia, the second Gogol of Revizor and Dead Souls, the great Gogol, who is supranational, non-national. He's a Russian author, but for Nabokov, it's all the same if he writes in Russian or in English or in any other language. The main thing, not in Little Russian, not in this dialect, not in this ridiculous dialect. And then there is a third Gogol after his greatest novels. This third Gogol is Russian religious thinker, all Russian religious thinker, great Russian religious thinker. And this religious thought of Gogol is for Nabokov as a writer rubbish, but it was also rubbish for Gogol himself. That's why he burned his manuscripts of that time. So there is one great Gogol in the middle, which is non-national, which belongs to the whole world, which writes in Russian. But the reason why Nabokov is so happy with Gogol is that he is not Little Russian. He doesn't write dialect. He is not making vaudeville. He wants to write a real text. And Nabokov himself explains that. And this explanation, it is interesting. Nabokov was forbidden in the Soviet Union. Throughout the whole Soviet period, he was completely forbidden, not because of Lolita, but because of everything. He was an immigrant and so on. But what he's writing in his text, and no Soviet author could read that, but it actually reflects the understanding of the Russian literature in the 20th century and Russian, let us say, colonial understanding of Ukrainians as little village clowns who are so funny. They use their funny dialect, their funny language. If we ask ourselves, is there a real chauvinist positioning in the understanding of Nabokov? I wouldn't say so. It is the understanding, it is an imperialistic position. It's the position, it's the view of somebody who is seeing the collapse of the Russian Empire as a tragedy. And this tragedy created new circumstances. We move from the middle of the 19th century to closer to the 20th century, and we come to the year 1916. And to a wonderful Russian author of Ukrainian origin, understanding the goals and the dreams of Ukrainian to get independence. This author's name is Vladimir Galaktionovich Korolenko, in Russian Korolenko, in Russian Imperial, Russian Korolenko. And he writes about another Ukrainian author, which is extremely important for understanding of this Ukrainian mockery, funny, ridiculous Ukraine. And this other author is Kotlяревский, Ivan Petrovich Kotlяревский, who was the author of the burlesque translation of Aeneid into Ukrainian. It is a beautiful poem, published in the year 1794 and then later republished and always popularized at that time in the 19th century and later in the Soviet time. Why was it popularized? Because Kotlyarsky wrote a funny poem. It is a text of classical epic poem, but this text by Kotlyarsky, this Aeneid translated into Ukrainian, is translated into the language, which should be at that time readable also for the Russian public, but should be funny. Ukrainian is funny. Ukrainian text, Ukrainian poem, created by Kotlyarsky, is funny. But why is Korolenko in the year 1916, and we do remember that 1916 is the peak of the World War I, why is he writing about events which took place in Poltava, in a very Ukrainian city of the Russian Empire, in the year 1903? Because in the year 1903, and that's the next slide, please. In the year 1903, people of Poltava decided to put a monument to Kotlyarsky, their great, one of their greatest citizens. 13 years later, Korolenko, who is trying to build a picture of future Ukraine, says we have to understand what the Ukrainian population on the territory of Russian Empire is dreaming of. They are dreaming of their cultural sovereignty. So they decided to open this monument. And in the year 1903, a huge delegation of Ukrainians from Austria-Hungary, from Galicia, Galiciana in Ukrainian, came to Russia and gave their speeches. You can read this text if you have spectacles, you can see it. They came to Russia and they started, says Korolenko, they started speaking fantastic Ukrainian, beautiful language. He was there at that time. They were speaking in Ukrainian. But as soon as Russian Ukrainians wanted to send their words to say in Ukrainian to the public and to their compatriots from the Austrian side, they were stopped by the vice governor of Poltava, who said, no, Ukrainian is allowed for them, for the Austrians, but not for you, you are Russians. You have to speak Russian here in Russia. But why are we opening the monument to Kotlyarsky? He was Ukrainian poet. He is the author of the great poetry. And then there was another voice. You probably know that in current Russian, there is a word banderovцы. Bandera, Stepan Bandera, during the World War II, was struggling against Soviet Union, but also was imprisoned by Germans. I don't want to go in details of the biography of this guy, but the current Russian word, curse word, Banderovets, means Ukrainian, Ukrainian nationalist, Banderovцы. At the beginning of the 20th century, when Bandera was not yet born, there was another word in Russian describing Ukrainian nationalists, and that was Mazepinцы, Mazepa. another Ukrainian guy who defected. And at the very beginning of the 18th century, was struggling on the side of Swedish king against Peter the Great. So Mazepinci. And when we are now reading the text by Korolenko, we realize how little has changed. Within 1 century, you had Mazepinci, now we have Banderovci. The monument of Kotlyarevsky is in Poltava and is staying somewhere near the monument to Mazepa. That is a chain of nationalism. Korolenko ends his analysis with the word that we are still living under the rule of a person from Gleb Uspensky, another Russian author, Memritsov, who said that our main goal is of our state and of our people of state, тащить и не пущать, to drag and not let go. The Soviet Ukrainian language took this tradition and developed it in the figure of very popular, between 1946 and 1986, a very popular Russian comica. Could we see the video? Whose names were Tarapunka and Stepsil. So Tarapunka, I don't know how to translate his name, Stepsil. Actually, these names are now more, please, maybe at the beginning, yes. Just to have, to understand what is going on. It's 1961.
Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи. Добрый вечер. Приветствую вас. Здоровенькі були. А чи не здається тобі, Штепсель, що ми трошки перепунькали, а?
Ничего мы не перепутали. В эти дни празднования 325-летия воссоединения Украины с Россией в Москве поют «Украина моя, Украина, золотая моя сторона».
А в Киеве «Я люблю тебя, Россия, дорогая моя Русь».
Песни разные, а смысл один. И сколько таких песен? Вот русская песня «Светит месяц».
It's difficult to stop them. But these two actors, they were born in Kiev, and they, for 40 years, they were the main, let us say, bilingual comics on the Soviet television. One of them is speaking Russian, very, very, I would say, cultivated Russian, and that is Stepsil. And Tarapunka, the taller guy, is a sort of villain Ukrainian guy, speaking Surjik, the mixture of Ukrainian and Russian. They were, they started with a very distinctive pronunciation. The one was speaking this very good Russian, the other one was speaking his Ukrainian, but by the end of their career, till the end of 1980s, they both started speaking Russian, because the official politics of bilingualism was somehow reduced to a form of accent. It was enough to have an accent. Other languages of the brother peoples of the USSR. And again, for many people who used to watch them, to listen to them, to admire them, it was somehow innate to realize that Ukrainian is for fun. It's not serious. And there is always this other guy, this Stepsil, who will come and in a difficult moment explain what is wrong and what is correct. the modern Ukrainian author, Oksana Dumanska, who, by the way, she translated from Russian into Ukrainian the worst book by Gogol, Taras Bulba, the absolute terrible. I don't understand how people at all can read this opus. She writes that the so-called policy of language, she called this policy of language schizophrenia, which started with this duet, with these standard comics. Because the official bilingualism, Russian-Ukrainian bilingualism, fit into dichotomy of high-low, prestigious, non-prestigious, quite clear which is prestigious, which not. Normative, non-normative, urban, rural. Stetzel is a smart and sensible Russian-speaking partner with a correct pronunciation. Tarapunka is a funny dupe and redneck. This image, this specific linguistic paranoia maybe, was connected by the end of the Soviet Union with a very specific theory, which is still extremely popular among many Russians, that under Leonid Brezhnev, who came to power after dismissal of Khrushchev, and since 1967 he was actually in power, he came together with the so-called Dnipropetrovsky clan, the Ukrainians by origin who took Moscow and the apparatus of the Central Committee of the party. Dumanska and other authors mean that many Ukrainians at that time were trying to Ukrainianize the Russian, the Soviet state. Whereas on the practical level, there was a Russification of Ukraine. There are many linguistic evidences of implementing Ukrainian words, Ukrainian terms in Russian vocabulary at that time already. And now we have a continuation of that. Ukrainian words like nezalezhny, Maidan are widely used in Russian political discourse with a very negative meaning. And these words are used not only towards Ukrainian. In the memoirs of Alexander Lebed, we read, written in the middle of 1990s, he writes about nezalezhny Azerbaijan. So he uses Ukrainian word with a negative meaning. Nezalezhny means unfairly seeking for independence. So Azerbaijan. If we read now something about Kazakhstan, we can easily find the description of events in Kazakhstan as Maidan. People who are against current government in Armenia could be called Maidanutia, which means crazy through Maidanization. But the word Maidan is, although it's of Turkic origin, but now it doesn't matter, it is a Ukrainian word. The Ukrainian word is used in Russian in order to show the depth of mockery we want to express towards Ukraine and towards any form of independence. As you see, I think my time is already over, because I would very much like to have questions and to have a discussion. As you see, the general idea that mockery, making funny, making ridiculous, is a method, let us say cultural method, which led to the new situation in which we are sitting now, we are living now. There is nothing more ridiculous than what Russian government is saying about events in Ukraine. There is nothing more funny than faces of Putin and his people. But at the same time, it is a sardonic laughter. It is not irony, it is not sarcastic, it is not a laughing matter or smiling matter. It is laughter which leads you directly to the death of society, to the destruction of cities, to killing your own people. And that is why I think that this habit of ridiculing Ukraine has become as constant for an educated society in Russia, and actually forced people to the paralysis they feel now. They feel paralyzed by what is going on, because this laughter, this ridiculizing cannot help them understand what's going on. They are staying alone in the history of Europe of the 21st century. Thank you very much for your attention.